I have to.
I'm going to put the special issue thing up on my screen, too. I got to put this in my purse. I don't want to lose my briefcase. So how is the Hayward Inn? Is it nice?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, Cindy Stark said she's there. Not quite. Not quite. I'm not. I've got to find a pen. Yes, so it just, but I got to get my things out and I got to get my phone out because that gives me the order in which we're doing things too, in case we forget. Well, no, I'm not going to forget. Yeah.
We'll figure it out.
Okay.
You go first.
Okay, welcome back. I know it's hard to shut off conversations from what were probably very interesting sessions. We have a slightly different panel this afternoon, but first we begin with an announcement.
Up here. Oh, is this on? Can you hear me?
It's on.
It's on. It's just not close enough.
Yes, it's not close enough.
Or just hold it.
How's this? Not only are there archives, look, just for this announcement, I'm going to just yell at you.
Yeah, we're going to have to pass that.
Okay. Not only are there archives to be opened at this conference, there is now a directory of archives that is up as of yesterday. And it's, can you scroll down? And it's going to be, this is what is, so it's going to be of archives of people, of organizations, and of journals. And it was supported by the APA with a small grant we were awarded it in January. And so I just wanted you to know of its existence. I'm going to announce it again tonight at the library. And so if you have an archive, you should send, there's an email up there, something like a feminist philosophy, oh no, it's probably down at the end of the page, where you email the information about your archive. Yeah, that's it. If you don't have an archive, if you're, say, like me and think, oh, I don't want an archive, what do they want me for? You do. You want an archive. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Yes, thank you. And then you'll have one and you'll be listed. And then people can do research and they'll find all these interesting things out. Okay, that's it.
But Erin, before you start, these mics don't work. So we're going to have to pass that one.
Okay. So can you talk into it?
Hello.
But it doesn't. It works if you blow, but it doesn't work when you talk.
I am speaking into this. Am I speaking loudly into this? Oh, yeah. Yeah, you just has to be real close.
Okay.
Okay, so we have logistical challenges. We'll see how we do. So welcome to the Looking Back panel. This panel has been presented with questions from the program committee, and so I will read you those questions, but I'm going to start with the questions the three panelists have written for you, the audience, to be thinking about during the time they're speaking so that we have a conversation afterwards. So your questions are, how has Hypatia influenced your life, positively or negatively? What would you like to see for Hypatia moving forward? So how has Hypatia influenced your life, and how would you like to see Hypatia move forward? So they want you to be thinking about those things. So today we have, did you edit a special issue by chance? Okay, so we have three people who have served as editors of Hypatia and have also all three edited special issues, which may be even harder than being an editor sometimes. And that's why we really have them here today. They are clearly prominent feminist scholars in their own right, but here they're really speaking about their experiences with Hypatia. So Nancy Tuana was an editor from 1998 to 2003, and Cudd from 2010 to 2013, and Garry from 2017 to 18. And I think they'll probably speak about some of their experiences as we go forward. So, the questions they were asked to respond to. Question 1. As you think about the history of Hypatia, its successes and shortcomings, and about the current conditions for and obstacles to the practice of feminist philosophy, what are the lessons you draw from that history? What can we learn from that history in approaching contemporary conditions and questions? Question 2. Has Hypatia, and if so, how, enabled us to live feminist lives? How might it do so going forward? Included here for us, the program committee, is thinking about moments when Hypatia has or might in the future extend beyond academia and into other spaces. So they have divided up a kind of dialogue. So I will turn it over to them. I think Anne, Garry, and Nancy are starting.
We're really happy to be here, and thank you to the editorial team of Hypatia and all the students for all the work you've done, not only for the last 4 2/3 years, but also for the conference. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about olden times, because the origins of Hypatia aren't very well known. I mean, unless you happen to be at the 2009 conference where we talked about them, but not too many of you were. A couple of things, though, before we start on that. As I started thinking about all this, I was going back and forth between Hypatia as an institution and the people of Hypatia, the people who were involved in Hypatia. And I mean, it's not just the editorial team and all the, people that work with them, or the authors. It's the reviewers. It's the publishers. It's the audience for Hypatia. It's people. And so when you think about the journal has the responsibility, or the journal is accountable to a community or communities, it's us, the people, who are. And the second thing is, when you think about what does Hypatia influence, or what's Hypatia responding to, it's a chicken-egg thing. Hypatia both responds to outside thinking, both feminist and non-feminist, and the conditions in the world, and it has an influence on them. So those are just a little caveats. But the first lesson from the early days of Hypatia that I was thinking of is that it takes a lot of cooperative work, hard work, tenacity, standing up for yourselves and taking responsibility against very serious odds. If we start at the beginning of Hypatia, it was the 1970s. There wasn't even a climate to call chilly for feminist philosophy. There wasn't any oxygen for feminist philosophy. But all around the country, in Eastern SWIP, Midwest, and Pacific, people wanted a journal. We wanted a place to publish the work we were doing, because it was very hostile out there. But somebody had to start doing something to make this happen. So in Pacific, we just had an informal group that got together at a SWIP meeting, and we just divided up tasks, and Helen Longino was supposed to look for publishers. We didn't even, there wasn't even a committee with a name. It was just some people. Jackie Thompson and I were to call for an editorial board, nominations for an editorial board, and then somehow we were supposed to choose it. I'm not sure who authorized us to choose it. Somebody did, and so we did. And we got, there was a lot of interest in it, but we wanted it to be, wanted it to have some kind of balance, because there's always been a lot of issues. There are a lot of controversies. What do we have up up there. Oh, that's for a part that's coming later. Don't worry. I mean, how mainstreamy, how radical did we want to be? We had to have a balance of straight women and lesbians. We wanted to have a balance of, I have a whole list written here. Just a sec. Ethnicity and race. Different parts of the country in terms of geography, both the US and Canada. We didn't think of going outside North America at that point for we didn't even have a name yet, for lack of a better word, editorial committee. So we tried to balance that, and then we just picked people, and then those people then divided up the labor, and Azizah Al-Hibri was known to some of us, I don't even remember who of us exactly, but we knew she was interested in editing it. So we appointed her oh, that's much better, thank you. We appointed her the editor, and then she and Helen Longino put in a good bit of time looking for a publisher. And keep in mind that there was no email. There was no Zoom. Letters. Mail. It was slow. I remember having a meeting at an APA meeting with Sage, the people who operate that publisher, and it looked really promising, and they turned us down for very bad reasons. But Azizah had a connection with Dale Spender, who was editing Women's Studies International Forum, and that's how Hypatia came to be like an insert being hatched. So the first 3 issues were within WSIF for short. And if you look at the table of contents of those issues, the first 2 were open calls. The third was a special issue on Simone de Beauvoir, which came from a conference and that issue was edited by Peg Simons. Now, Azizah began law school at the very beginning of all this. So it was the students at Penn who did a great deal of work as a collective. So Hypatia really had a group of women working together at the very beginning. So my main lesson from the very beginning was it's hard work, but someone's got to do it. And that someone could be you. So then Nancy's going to take over with Peg Simons, are you not?
Yeah, but you want to talk about how Peg got to be the first editor?
Well, Peg got to be the first editor because we knew she could do a good job because she'd done a good job on the special issue.
Yeah.
And that there was no big call for editorial teams at that point. There was no internet for us to use. Only whoever they had, DARPA had it. It was not, it was a small group of very beleaguered people who were doing it.
It was a group of very committed people who made Hypatia happen. So, we look at Hypatia now, we're celebrating its 40th anniversary. We're the premier journal of feminist philosophy. Hypatia started without a publisher. It started without a budget. Peg used to go to all the SWIP meetings, Society for Women in Philosophy meetings, talking to the SWIP sections, trying to get some money. It was for the first 5 years, for the first set of issues 1 through 5, it was published with a printing press. We didn't have a journal, a publisher. Peg did all the work in-house with help from friends. So it had a very humble beginning. It had a beginning based in commitment and belief that the work that we did was so important, we needed a place to publish it. Because without a place to publish it, we had no way to get make sure that we got tenure, we got promoted, our work got spread out. So there's a number of people who really need to be thanked, but one of them is Peg Simons, who kept Hypatia going for those first 5 years and was key in negotiating with Indiana University Press, which was the first press that picked us up. Yep. So, I mean, one of the things, again, one of the lessons to be learned is the importance of collective action with Hypatia. Lots of us were involved. Peg started the practice of special issues, having done one for Women's Studies International Forum. And it was a group of people who volunteered their time with Anne and friends from Pacific all the way to Peg, keeping it going until we had a press and then continuing on after that. So I think that was, now it's turning to Anne.
I did forget one thing about the balance of the editorial group that we had at first. We also were trying to look at different people's methodologies and their areas of interest. So we need some epistemologists, some ethics people, some continental people, some analytic people. We didn't have decolonial yet. And we never went to, I mean, we have published some non-Western articles, but we never had that as an aim. It was all too big.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for your work, because you were founding mothers of this journal. And I come much later. No, not much later, just a little bit later. I was finishing graduate school in 1988 at the University of Pittsburgh, hardly a haven for feminist philosophy. However, I did have, a couple of very important, influential women professors who did kind of turn my head in the direction of feminism just as I was finishing my dissertation on game theory and the philosophy of economics. So Tamara Horowitz being one of them, who also did game theory, among many things, and Annette Beyer being another really important influence. But anyway, so I go to the University of Kansas as an assistant professor in the fall of 1988 to date me. And I'll say something more when we get to the special issue thing about a certain Hypatia influence on me. But what I wanted to do was, for this, I'm sorry I haven't written a paper, but I do have some empirical work that I did on the many issues of Hypatia that I wanted to share. One of the questions that we were asked to address, the first question, which Aaron read, there was a parenthetical that came after it that I'm really going to address, and it goes like this. Some things we thought about while drafting this question in relation to contemporary conditions were the ecological crisis, the global rise of authoritarianism, questions of gender and embodiment related to trans and intersex lives, and the retrenchment and active revitalization of white supremacy in education, voting practices and law, and retrenchment and revitalization of reproductive injustice. So I took that list and I took some of those issues and I thought, okay, I'm going to go back and see when certain kinds of themes appeared and how they've kind of changed over time. I did not do a deep reading. Some of you may know I have a new job and it's very time consuming right now, and I just moved across the country and, sold and bought a house and all that kind of stuff, and, I'm new to Oregon, but, I'm already entrenched. So anyway, I did this empirical investigation. So I'm going to mention 8 themes that we can trace through the history of the journal that I think are closely connected to the sort of external political struggles that have both influenced feminist philosophy, and especially the authors who have written in the pages of this journal, as well as, of course, those, I believe those, at least some of those struggles have certainly been influenced by what we've done. And I think that feminist philosophy is particularly well positioned to theorize and interrogate these issues. And so this is not in chronological order, the themes. It's kind of in a haphazard order. But the first theme is climate change. So early in Hypatia's existence, ecofeminism became a prominent theme, right? Or methodology. And of course, this came after, like, for example, the groundbreaking work that Rachel Carson did, in the 60s maybe, and that led to the banning of DDT. And so pollution was certainly an early theme in this kind of work. But ecofeminism recognized, I think, how disastrous the Anthropocene, whatever, it was for the Earth and other species. But climate change as a phrase, or even global warming, which kind of came before climate change as a phrase, as planetary phenomena had not yet really fully been recognized. In volume 6, number 1, spring of 1991, ecological feminism was a special topic. Ecofeminism I take to be a critique of anthropocentrism and speciesism, and it argues for the intrinsic value of nature, the ecosystem, and other species, and for their equal right to coexist. And I think there's a real connection between ecofeminism and then later articles about climate change. So there was a smattering of ecofeminist articles other than that 1991 entire issue. For example, in 97, there was a paper by Greta Gard called Toward a Queer Ecofeminism. And that's another thing about my tracing of these histories is how intertopical, if you will, all of these topics are. There was a symposium on Lorraine Coates' ecological thinking in 2008. And also in 2008, Brown and Hayward wrote the first article I could find that had the phrase climate change, which is Let's Talk About the Weather, Decentering Democratic Debate About Climate Change. And it was in a symposium in honor of, in memory of Iris Marion Young, so really took up her democratic deliberation kind of work. In 2011, Trish Glazerbrook published Women and Climate Change, a case study from Northeast Ghana. And then in summer of 2014, there was an entire special issue on climate change, so that'll be on there. And then since then, there have been about 3 more articles that have been published on climate change, but also bringing back ecofeminism as a way of framing it. So that's climate change. Global rise of authoritarianism. So the organizers suggested that we trace the global rise of authoritarianism, as they put it, to see how Hypatia authors have been influenced. And in browsing with the journals with this, or the issues with this in mind, I noted that more the effects of authoritarianism in and on the US and the West. And one major topic was to see the 9/11 attacks as a particular evil. So in 2003, in particular, Hypatia included, a 2003 issue of Hypatia included a forum on the September 11, 2001 attacks, and it was called September 11, 2001 Feminist Perspectives on Terrorism. It had 9 essays, which is if you look at a veritable who's who of prominent feminist political philosophers at that time. So Ami Badami Baran wrote a paper, Claudia Card, Drusilla Cornell, Alison Jagger, and Sarah Ruddock and Iris Young, for instance. So it was really interesting to see how they focused on both terrorism as an evil, but also kind of the response to the terrorist attacks as also kind of evil, as racist. And okay, 7 more minutes. Okay, good. And I'm only on topic number 2. That's your point. Okay, I could skip some. So and then the geopolitical effect of the 9/11 attacks in subsequent wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were, of course, world-changing and morally problematic as well. And feminists took note in the pages of Hypatia. In 2008, we saw a special issue devoted to the topic of just war, edited by Ami Baran. And in her introduction, she refers to the numerous terrorist attacks around the world that had occurred in the previous 7 years, beginning with the 9/11 attacks in 2001. And so kind of a representative article from that is Margaret Denike's The Human Rights of Others, Sovereignty, Legitimacy, and Just Causes for the War on Terror. And I think these essays relate to the authoritarianism in that they criticize both the terrorists and the imperialistic tendency of the U.S., and in particular the George W. Bush regime in waging war under the pretense of humanitarianism, right? And so that was a very prominent theme in political philosophy generally, was humanitarian intervention or just war sort of stuff. Neoliberalism also related to this, and another topic for which there's quite a bit of work. The feminist critique of neoliberalism, which could, I think, be described as using the present pretense of appeals to freedom to support the growth of inequality. So, there I see starting in basically in 2002, Virginia Held wrote a piece, and Alison Jagger another piece, a feminist critique of this alleged Southern debt, and then even coming up to closer times to now, the last one in the list that I have here of these sort of articles is Robin Zhang's Precarity is a Feminist Issue, Gender and Contingent Labor in the Academy. Okay, lots of stuff on colonialism and on the related topic of border crossings, both metaphorical and actual. And so again, this is intertopical, as the previous session kind of illustrated Andrea's work and Sarah's. Okay, so here there's a lot of stuff to talk about, but Uma Narayan was publishing back in the mid-90s on this. So in 1995, she publishes Colonialism and Its Others, Considering on Rights and Care Discourses. Annette Beyer also published an article on immigration in 1995, a note on justice, care, and immigration policy. And then in 1998, there were 2 issues because they had so many articles they couldn't fit them into one, but 2 issues that are special issues edited by Sandra Harding and Uma Narayan that had between them 14 articles on border crossings, multicultural and post-colonial feminist challenges to philosophy. And cosmopolitanism is also kind of another aspect of this set of articles that I was looking at. There was also another special issue that Sally Schultz edited in 2013 on crossing borders. And of course, with the importance of migration and immigration now, there are still articles. This is a hot topic, I would say, still. All right, I'm going to skip that one. And I think maybe I'll pass over this because the panel did such a good job of well, maybe I shouldn't, because I think that now if we change gears to look at sort of the liberatory, inclusionary potential of feminist thought, I want to first highlight the fertile ground of thinking about changing views around gender, embodiment, transgender lives and rights, and intersectionality. Okay, that's a very big, broad topic, but nonetheless, I think really important. And of course, Jacob Hale's 1996 article, Are Lesbians Women, was really important in sort of starting off the transgender work. But intersexuality was also a very important topic, right? At that point, there were a couple of articles on that and on sort of the science of sexuality. So, for example, Sharon Krasnow's 2001 piece, Models in Reality When Science Tackles Sex. And then a few years later, the politics and lived experiences of transgender persons became much more prominent. And of course, Talia Betcher's work is very prominent in this, her 2007 piece, Evil Deceivers and Make-Believers on Transphobic Violence and Politics of Illusion. And then comes, well, let's see, where did it? A special issue, co-edited by Talia and Anne, on transgender studies and feminism, theory, politics, and gendered realities, which has 8 articles in it. So that's the summer of 2009. It really begins to, or doesn't begin, but really advances the transgender philosophy movement. And then 2019, Talia's What is Trans Philosophy? That piece, very important in that whole set. And then the most recent 4 articles published in the past 2 years in this area has tackled metaphysical questions about the meaning of gender in women. So I wanted to mention these. Marquis Bay, in 2021, Troubled Genders, LGBT, Collapse and Trans Fundamentality. Matilda Carter in 2022, Trans Women Are or Are Becoming Female. Disputing the Endogeneity Constraint. Ramada Zeminska in 2022, Toward a Non-Binary Model of Gender, Sex, Traits. And then in 2023, just 1 month ago, because it was published online on August 7th, 2023, Marcus Arvon, Trans Women, Cis Women, Alien Women, and Robot Women Are Women. They are all simply adults gendered female. So it's sort of a metaphysical reading of what it is, what women is. And so now I have no time, but I just want to say there were 2 other topics that also you can trace a really interesting history. One is, of course, disability rights, right? Beginning with Anita Silvers in 95. And reproductive rights and reproductive justice, of course, throughout the entire time of Hypatia. That's been an important topic, and it's of, this is the story of, rights and then backlash, and that is certainly apparent in all of the articles that you see in this time. So I will stop there. What's next?
Yeah, so now we're going to the special.
So we thought it would be interesting just to get a look at some of the special issues over the decades, the 4 decades of Hypatia. Before we start, I just wanted to, you're going to move it for us. Oh, thank you. I just wanted to call out the importance of guest editors. There are always editors for Hypatia, but our guest editors are so important to the direction in which Hypatia goes, the ability to pull together. Anne has already called out a number of the special issues that were able to bring together voices that were just starting to emerge, or new perspectives. And it's, think about becoming a guest editor at some point, because it's an amazing thing to do. Y'all want to talk about the first decade of special issues? mean,
Okay, so I mentioned that, yeah, I'll talk about one of them from the first decade, which was the 1989 Volume 4, Issue 1, The History of Women in Philosophy. And I think I mentioned that, I arrived in Lawrence, Kansas in 1988 as an assistant professor in the fall of 88. And then this issue came out just months after that. And okay, I must have actually had a physical subscription to this journal by then, because I remember, maybe that was the first one that I got too. And this was not a history of philosophy that I had learned at the University of Pittsburgh. And I sat down, I've never done this before since, probably don't ever have the time, but I literally sat it down and read it for the entire day and just read every single article in there. And I'm not a historian of philosophy. Of course, I took the required seminars and all that, but that's not my main thrust. But this was so interesting to me. And thinking back on why that was, well, I was the first woman in the department of philosophy at Kansas, and I definitely felt like I was in a sea of men, in a world of only men who had done philosophy, and this was really kind of a lifeboat. So I guess that's all I'll say.
so if you could swipe it for us, so that to the next decade.
A number of the issues Anne had talked about in her part of it were in the next decade. Maybe we could just contrast a little bit there. There was concern always, though analytic people thought it was really too continental a journal, and continental people thought it was too analytic a journal. But the editors really did try to have some balance. And if you look at 6/3/1991, Feminism and the Body, Elizabeth Gross, that was a pretty continental issue. There was an analytic issue that Anne and Virginia Klink did. Some people did adopt the wave ideas of feminism, so there was a third wave issue then. And then you already talked about the multiculturalism and post-colonial challenges, and there was a lot there. It covered two issues. Why don't you go on and talk about the next?
And then swipe it again for us. We'll move to the third decade of Hypatia. One of the things that was, for me, really impressive was the Going Australia volume, because we got a chance to see the way in which a number of people whose work had been influenced actually by Jenny Lloyd, who was the only woman full professor in Australia at the time. And there was just generations of wonderful feminist philosophers, including Elizabeth Gross, who were trained by Jenny. And that Going Australia volume was a way to start to think beyond U.S. feminisms, followed by our first issue in translation when Penny Deutscher did the new contemporary, what do we call it, contemporary French women's philosophers, and identified a group of French feminist philosophers who weren't being read because they weren't yet in translation. So we were reading we were reading Beauvoir, and we were reading Rigoray, and we were reading Cixous, but they were the ones who were in translation. What Penny did was to get a whole group of very influential French feminist philosophers and then get people to translate their work. And that's a tradition that the current editors have continued. You all want to say anything else about that decade?
Well, I'd like to say something about your issue on it was 21/3/2006 that you did with Shannon. Oh. I mean, that is a teachable issue. I've taught it. And I mean, I think the whole work on ignorance and injustice and all that in epistemology, I mean, that's another great thing about having these issues. They have an influence beyond just this scholarly community, because back in the days when students used to purchase things, they could be purchased, and they loved them. Anything else on that? Oh,
Maybe we should
how
go to
many
let's go to the next
Okay,
decade.
let's-
Can you swipe it for us?
Go ahead.
Well, you have something on the next decade?
No, not really.
Okay.
I don't really have it on this decade.
Well, let's say something about, there's not just special issues, there are clusters. Sometimes a cluster happens because it was supposed to be a special issue and not enough people got their articles in, things like that. There are always contingencies. Sometimes a cluster is it just occurs. A lot of people submit on a topic. That's a found cluster. And other times, like when I was editing, this will be really in the
Swipe again. Thank you.
no, I'm sorry. It's
Go back.
it's 2016, and then I don't think we got the other one in there, the one on gaslighting. That should be there somewhere.
I'll put it in there.
I thought so, but anyway, there was.
Here it is.
Oh, it's later. It's later. Sorry about that. But there were conferences that were held that a few papers were interesting. And now, mind you, all these papers go through the regular process of review. They're not like an invitation. It's an invitation, but they go through everything, just the same. An invitation to submit, right. And then when you get to after 2000, we had people, well, this is actually going on to the next part. So why don't I talk about the conjure feminism one in the next part?
Really? Okay.
Well, no, let me just talk about it now. Christy Dotson knew some of the people who edited the Conjure Feminism issue, 36.3, 2021. And so and she encouraged them. Now, this was after 2017, which we really are going to talk about. So it was in the spirit of goodwill that that Christy was helping to find people who would help diversify what we were doing. These are English scholars, and I've forgotten what, English theater, African American studies. But this was a special issue. It drew in authors who wouldn't have submitted to Hypatia otherwise. And with a special issue, the editors take over as editors. So the people that are the editorial team hand the authority over to the editors of that issue. And so that was something, it didn't come out while I was an editor, but Nancy and I were on the committee that vetted the application. Anything else?
I think we better move on.
Yeah, I think you should. Oh, well, that's me. Yeah, okay. Okay, so 2017. A lot of us remember 2017 who were involved in Hypatia. That was the year that Tuvel's article on can't even say it, transracialism did cause a crisis, but it was not just Tuvel's fault. When there's been tension between groups within your community, enough happens and it snaps. Another problem is because Hypatia, I mean, we'd had squabbles, we'd had disagreements over those years before that. But a lot of us had known each other a long time, which is both an advantage and a disadvantage, right? For example, the associate editors, even though in the very beginning we thought associate editors should have 5-year terms, but then we forgot it. And until Nancy and Lori Schrage came in as editors in 1998, and they said, you know, maybe the associate editors should have terms. It was the same group of people. And so I think I went off the associate editor board after the year 2000. I don't know exactly the year, but it was a very long time. But because of the continuity and because there was a history of goodwill, we didn't have serious crises. So we had no institutional way of handling it. Also, by 2017, there wasn't just one board, there were 2 boards. The associate editor board was to deal with content. They dealt with special issues. They dealt with finding the new editorial team. They advised the editor or editors on whatever they needed advice on concerning content. Allison Wiley created the nonprofit board, a larger board, I mean, not larger than the AEs, but a larger nonprofit board than we'd had in the past. And we had a document, we had bylaws, and we had the area of responsibility of contract negotiation, anything legal, anything with taxes, money, I mean, all the stuff that isn't particularly interesting, but if you're a nonprofit, you have to do it. But in 2017, there was no way to resolve the conflict because there wasn't a structure. Well, there is now. One thing we learned from that is you need structures. And so the current ways that Hypatia works, there are joint committees set up to facilitate communication on every topic, right? Whatever it is. We all signed the commitment to, it's COPE, what is it? Code of Ethics. It's COPE, the Publishing Ethics, Code of Publishing Ethics, something like that. So, and there is goodwill. There's always been goodwill, but sometimes goodwill isn't enough, and goodwill doesn't even happen, and people dig their heels in. I really don't want to talk about 2017, frankly, but it has to be talked about. But one of the things we learned from that, I learned from it, and I think other people learned from it, is that you've got to have constant, ongoing attention and willingness to examine your own assumptions and limitations and biases. And even though we have a set of rules now for the institution, and so we took care of that problem, the problem of not knowing our own individual limitations and assumptions is an ongoing one. I mean, we have to keep looking at ourselves and being open to hearing people not liking the assumptions others of us are making and spots we don't see. So that was, I think that's about, there's a very good article by Austa. Is Austa here yet? I see she's on the program, but maybe she's just coming virtually. Okay, she has a really good article because she was on the associate editors at the time. To do metaphysics as a feminist, reflections on feminist methodology in the light of the Hypatia affair, which is what she's calling 2017. It's in the APA newsletter on feminism. volume 17.1. So she wrote that. I heard her give the talk at a conference that same summer. So it's very much at the same time. And then there's another paper that isn't particularly about that, but it's in either issue 1 or 2 of Hypatia this year. It's pages 275 to 293. Would that be issue 1? Well, it's anyway. It is open access. It's Rima Basu. Risky Inquiry, Developing an Ethics for Philosophical Practice. And it's very good. I mean, she talks about all the risks of doing, philosophy. It's not like science. You don't have IRBs, but it's good. That's all I wanted to say about that.
So one of the narratives of our story is how Hypatia needs to keep growing and learning. I want to call out Linda Lopez McAllister, for example, who realized we needed to have nonprofit status. I mean, we'd been going for, 6 years before Linda became the editor, and we didn't actually have nonprofit status. And we are an entity. We do have funds, et cetera, et cetera. So that was really crucial, and we keep learning. When we moved our nonprofit status over to Washington, we realized, we are a corporation, nonprofit. We need a board and a governing board. And then in 2017, we realized, we actually need some procedures, which is what Anne was referring to. But there was also an internal crisis that happened in 2017, and it was very hard at the time, which is the current editor resigned. And Hypatia was thrown into crisis, and there was a time when many of us who've been with Hypatia for years were worried that we'd lose Hypatia. We didn't, and we didn't again because of the commitment of a lot of people. There were a lot of people that stood up and started to try to think about what we needed to do differently, and there were people, one of them sitting next to me, and Allison Stone and Serene Cater, who said, we'll just do it. We won't let Hypatia fall. We'll keep it going, and did a miraculous job of holding Hypatia together so that our incredible Oregon team could pick it up and bring it to the luster it currently has. But the lesson for me to learn is that institutions, things we take for granted, like Hypatia that's 40 years old, they're fragile. And they really require the commitment of a community to make sure they remain in good health. Oftentimes we need to be able to step in and volunteer, whether it be as a guest editor or, a crisis manager. And definitely if you're asked to review an article that's in your area, please say yes, because it really is a communal endeavor. And one that is incredibly successful because of literally thousands of people, many of whom are in the room, but many, many more who are all over the world who have made Hypatia what it is today. So.
Also say yes when I ask you to review a book, but other than that, we're good. So we have about 25-30 minutes for conversation. So just a reminder, if your comment or question relates to the questions the panelists had for you, how has Hypatia influenced your life, and what would you like to see for Hypatia moving forward? It would be nice to incorporate those, but certainly any comments or questions are appropriate now. Do we have anybody? So in the back.
Thank you so much for this wonderful panel. It was really nice to learn about Hypatia and all the challenges you went through. My question is about when did you start to publish non-Western feminist philosophical texts? And if you did that, what did provoke that move? So it seems to me even after September 11, most of the publication Hypatia were mostly US-based kind of questions. So I was wondering if there was a move towards publishing non-Western feminist epistemology, and also many other questions. What was the impact of that on questions of epistemology that I imagine are central for feminist philosophers? So anyhow, if you could answer to that, that would be great.
I don't either, but we could look at the list.
Well, why don't you speak to the special she guys just did?
Oh, the issue in translation, is Rocio here by any chance? Would be better. That would be much better.
What would you like me to speak about? The special issue that we did? All right. Hey, how are you? It's so good to see you. I think, I'm here with Bonnie Mann, and part of what the Oregon team did as a, what we wanted to contribute to the journal was a feminism and translation initiative. And it's really, Bonnie was the person that really got us excited about the idea, and we gave it shape, and we worked quite a bit on it. Just trying to, I'm going to speak about that initiative in our team, and of course, Hypatia has published in many other areas. But the idea was a little bit to try to reverse, right, the direction of the translation and the epistemic forms of capture and gaps that are generated by translations coming from the so-called global north to the global south, but not the other way around, which erases different genealogies of different genealogies of different bodies of thought and activism. So we put this in place, and also, by and large, hired, in particular, the special issue that we will be hearing from some of the authors and the editor, guest editor, Juliet Espinosa tomorrow afternoon. A panel that is dedicated to that issue. But the idea was mostly to, also try to hire translators adjacent to or part of the activist spaces where this, knowledge was being produced, to also try to shift a little bit the political economy of knowledge production. But that's something that we did as a team, the Oregon team, but I'm sure that there was a whole other host of initiatives that I'd be also curious to hear more about, that are, versions of that type of initiative concerning non-Western or decolonial, post-colonial, and questions of the relation between race and gender and so on.
If I could just add to that, I think the English language and Western grip on knowledge production is stubborn and intransigent, and Hypatia has not avoided being part of that. And change is hard. And I think for us at least, this effort it's very fledgling. It's very much in its beginning stages. And we have come up against over and over again, just in our short time with the journal, sort of the intransigence of those institutional structures that are rooted in the Western university system, knowledge production system. And so if Hypatia is to continue to change, that's not going to happen easily. It's going to be a fight to make that happen. And so I think while Hypatia has done some extraordinary things, Maria Lugones published a lot of her articles in Hypatia first. That was incredibly important to the establishment of decolonial feminist thought. But we are stuck in many ways in an economic and productive system that it's just intransigent, and it's really hard to change. So, yeah.
Well, I just wondered if Andrea Pitts wanted to say anything, because you just gave a paper in the last session on Latina feminist thought, and you could add usefully to this.
Well, I think it's a really important question, and I think one of the things I was just mentioning is that you could trace Latina and Latin American feminist threads from the preprint in the Women's International Forum prior to the first issue. But I think what's really interesting about that too is that if you look at like Maria Lugones's and Elizabeth Spellman's "Have We Got a Theory for You?" I mean, there's print in Spanish there that's really challenging exactly, I think, the same problem that you just named, Bonnie. You know, I think there was 83, yeah? So, you know, that lesson has not been addressed, right? I mean, Spellman and Lugones are naming it. They're showing the tension, the impossibility of translation across languages and worlds, and but desire for connection and for solidarity. I mean, it's a profound piece that is at, I think, like a very core, if we want to tell the origin of Hypatia from their moment. But yet, I'm not sure where, I mean, it would be interesting to track through all these special issues and editorial roles and so on, where the transformation is, because I think your question is a really important one about whether some of these really critical and important pieces in the journal do have the institutional uptake or the kind of material uptake that would actually make translation a regular part of a journal praxis, for example, right? I mean, these are huge shifts that I think would you know, I think really start to attend to some of your questions. So I appreciated the question.
It's to the same topic. Can I? Yeah. I found it interesting that you spoke about the year 2017, because that was actually one of the years that we had. You said the editor had resigned, and part of the impetus for that was the Feast conference prior to that, and then there was like this shift in language from, I think it was women of color was shifted to third world women or something like that. It created this big ruckus because a lot of people who are from the third world don't identify as third world women. And so, I think in that 2017 issue, there's a musing that kind of captures where Sireen Kader and Ranju and I and Christy Dotson like kind of wrote short reflections on what had happened. I do wanna say two points to that. One is that it's not just a language barrier, but as Andrea said, it's also like a world, like it's a issue of like what questions are even considered philosophical to be part of the journal. And so there's a massive barrier right there, because when you go through, like if you think about the terrorism issue, the one earlier on, I read that as a grad student, and I was like, I don't know what this is talking about. This does not speak to my experiences. In fact, if anything, this kind of reinforces the sort of the normative discourse on what terrorism is and what the response to terrorism should be and how it's evil, and sort of like what I thought was not a very critical way to look at it, but that was obviously my perspective, and I thought that other perspective was kind of missing at that point. So there's that, and the second point I want to say is that reviewers are super duper important. One of the problems that I always have is that my paper gets stuck, and then there's nobody to review them. Because everybody's like, well, this is really not my area of expertise. I'm not so sure. And so like sometimes it'll take like 2 years for it to get through just finding a reviewer and getting feedback. And so this is just the first initial feedback from the first day of. So my current, like, for example, my current paper that's about to come out in Hypatia about American ignorance and torture at Guantanamo Bay, I finished my first version and submitted it in 2015 to a journal, and now it's just forthcoming in Hypatia in 2023. So that just speaks to like sort of the other type of barrier. But having said that, I think Hypatia is one of the places where I have found a home for a lot of my papers, and they do end up finding reviewers, and I'm not surprised that they found a reviewer for my torture paper. So yeah, so I mean, yeah, when that request comes to review, especially if you're really subspecialized, you know, kind of say yes, because that'll help this problem as well.
I'd like to say a little bit, because I just happened, as I was looking back through issues, I did read, and she's talking about, it's up there, the contested terrains. That part of that was from a feast conference. Now, if it's a feast conference, it's not just the feast conference, there's an open call. But there's a musing, what you're talking about is a musing that's at the end, and about 5 different pieces in it, right? And it's really interesting to read, because that conference and that issue, the language of how to speak about what we were doing, what you were doing in that issue, is contested from the very beginning. So, I mean, I would highlight that for your reading.
Hi, I'm not a philosopher. I'm very honored I'm here this year as a guest, and I'm enjoying every moment of this conference, and I'm finding so many of the things that I'm hearing relevant to my work. I'm from WGSS department. I teach right now a course on post-colonial feminism, and I'm addressing some of the decoloniality and post-colonial issues in that course. I have a course on transnational feminism, and I talk a lot about war and terrorism and whatnot. And also I have some experience with 2 other conferences, National Women's Studies Association and Northeastern MLA, NEMLA. What I suggest here, I'm here and I'm happy to be connected with you for the rest of my life, and this comes out of that perspective. If anybody is willing to form a Women of Color caucus for Hypatia, and then we could be reviewers and supporters and sisters, I think that can solve some of that problem. Because, you know, my histories of becoming a professor in the US is very funny. Everybody talks to me, I say, okay, what life are you talking about? The previous life or the current life? Because some 12 years ago, I was an assistant professor of interdisciplinary studies, and I was ABD in cultural sociology, a very bloody movement in my country, a couple of years of exile and getting fired from my job, starting a new life in America. Right now I'm teaching women and gender studies, and I'm doing other stuff, and I have some non-traditional training in literature. And what I'm saying is that it's not just the field, it's us as human beings. It's not just that our works are interdisciplinary, it's that we are transnational and we are living outside the format. And I'm one of those people who love to review for you if that's something that relates to my work. But I feel like you're gonna need a system to find people like me that do not have disciplinary affiliations. And thank you very much for this panel. I enjoyed everything.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much. And just thank you, I mean, what an amazing haven for us who sort of came up in a way after, we were sort of you paved the way so that our lives were so much easier, so thank you. You know, when I first came to the US as a grad student, and I sort of did my best to kind of reform the then defunct New York SWIP. There were a lot of women I met there, and the words, my career was destroyed by X or such powerful man were ringing in my ears constantly. And I really just want to shout out to the older generation of feminists who paved the way for all this. So just so much respect and appreciation. But just a really practical kind of question, I guess, which is about this question of reviewing, because, I'm speaking also as the book review editor of the other feminist philosophy journal, Philosophia, and it's been really hard to find reviewers lately. And also my own work has been stuck in a review process for another journal, and this, that, and the other. So I'm just sort of curious about, maybe some strategies like, forming caucuses and so on, or, maybe, getting people together who are more committed to maybe making mutual commitments, mutual aid societies to try and think, because of the pandemic, there was such a slowdown for everything. And it's been very, very difficult finding reviewers for book, I solicit book reviews for publication, and no one wants to do it. So, and it's very demoralizing to ask and be told no over and over and over again. And then on top of that, there seems to have been a bit of a discourse circulating among academics, especially some more marginalized academics of color and academics of marginalized genders and so on and so forth, to almost encourage us to say no more, because this is unsung labor, this is unpaid, invisible labor, right? The classic invisible women's labor problem, or invisible marginalized people's labor, and so on. So I just wanted to invite the panel to maybe comment or muse or respond to those issues. Thanks.
No, I think that's a great point that I'm glad is getting raised. And from my position as an administrator, looking at the budget all the time and so resenting the expense of journals. And I mean, and as a result, the libraries, can't buy books anymore because they're paying so much for these journals. And then none of the people doing the work are actually getting, paid for this, right? And that includes the referees. So I understand the reluctance to do this labor for free. On the other hand, as a referee, I've learned so much. I mean, it's been an incredible professional development for me to referee articles, and especially, I would say, for Hypatia more than anything else. It's so broadened my mind. But, I also feel that way about committee work, right? Which is also another thing that you can barely get faculty to do anymore because, well, they're busy and they're not getting paid for that. And especially if they're precarious labor, if they're adjuncts, why would they want to do that, And so I get it. I think what we need, and maybe, Hypatia isn't on the forefront of this because we're not funded by the NIH, so there's not a requirement that everything be open access, but that may be coming.
It is coming.
It'll
be coming sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and so what are we doing? It'll be article charges, and then what? I mean, well, if it is article charges, I mean, that's a really corrupt system, because then faculty, or rather authors who do not have access to funding for that, how are they going to submit articles? So the whole system is kind of broken. So, I think we need some good solutions. I don't have solutions, but I'm willing to listen and to try to get some. So it looks like somebody back there really wants to say something about this issue.
We had a hand up first here. Can you hang on? Do you want to be on just Barry's topic?
It's this topic, but I can do it after.
Go ahead. Okay, it's very quick.
I'm not sure what. Yes, there's Philosophia. Yes, there's Hypatia, but there's also Feminist Philosophy Quarterly, FPQ. It's open access, and it doesn't use article charges. I don't know what their models are, how hard it is to shift to their model, whether their model is uniquely Canadian. I don't know the answer to that. But I mean, there are other models out here doing the same kinds of things that Hypatia values and considers important. I do know that they are also having trouble getting reviewers, right? Everybody is. But it feels a little different to be reviewing for an open access journal as a reviewer. And I've reviewed for multiple journals, and it just feels different to me to be reviewing for an open access journal than it does for a subscription-based journal. And it's not a question, it's more of a comment.
Just for information, our current publisher is moving us in that direction. It will take several years, but they also plan not to have article charges. That will not happen under our editorial team, but that is in process.
I wanted to comment on a comment I heard that it's not science, so we don't have an IRB. I was on the Mellon-funded Publishing Ethics in Philosophy grant project, and one of the themes that we heard was that, in general, the reason that the humanities don't have to go through an IRB process is that it's considered not to really be producing knowledge, and therefore not really to be capable of harming people.
That's true. Yeah.
And that just seems so striking and shocking and upsetting. And I wondered if Hypatia had internal conversations about thinking about what it means to be looking at work and to be inviting reviewers to think about that, since that IRB is not going to pick it up.
I don't have an answer, maybe you do, Erin, but the article to which I was referring people, that's a 2003 article in Hypatia, she takes up that very issue. Yes, we are doing harm, and here are the kinds of harm, and here's why it happens and how it happens, how we should change it. I do think being accountable to your communities is a way that we can think about that. I mean, because with the Tuvel article, there was a sense of betrayal, that Hypatia, by publishing that article, had betrayed people. Because our community was communities, a bunch of communities all put together, and some of the people rightfully part of these communities were betrayed. And so I think that if reviewers, and I believe you've got explicit guidelines now about how to review.
Yeah, and I don't know them all off the top of my head, so others can chime in, but it's our citation practices. You can't talk about a community without talking with that community and accessing that scholarship, and that is given to every reviewer, as well as our authors, but I'm sure that can be improved. But I think some of that came from COPE, and some was our own editorial team talking about that, but that will be an ongoing thing for all journals to be doing. We're coming close to time, so maybe one more question.
Oh, thanks. Can you put up 2003? Thank you, Four Mothers. Hi, everyone. I'm Peg Brandweiser. I co-edited the special issue in 2003 on aesthetics, women in art and aesthetics. And I just want to maybe ask us to step back from Hypatia and think about other journals as well. So I was in the American Society for Aesthetics, which had not published one article on feminist anything. But in 1990, I co-edited the first issue of the Journal of Aesthetics and Art Criticism on feminism. And it didn't really change the field. And the question is, why did I do it there first and not come to Hypatia first? Because I knew Hypatia had my back. And I knew also, though, the bad news is, if I had done aesthetics in Hypatia first instead of waiting till 2003, my colleagues in philosophy would say, so you had to go publish in that feminist journal because you couldn't get it published in the Journal of Aesthetics and Art Criticism. And mind you, parenthetically, I would never have gone to the BJA, the British Journal of Aesthetics, because they were in the 18th century, not the 19th century. So I think it's helpful to think of Hypatia as always there. I always felt you were always there if I needed you and if I wanted you, and when Mary Devereaux and I were ready. This fall, in November, we go to the national meeting of the ASA. We co-founded the Feminist Caucus of the ASA. We will do a 20-year anniversary session on that issue at the ASA, so that all the young people who now in the ASA who don't know that history will learn that history. But that work, which I don't believe we don't get paid for, that work is learning how to edit a journal or learning how to review a paper so that you write better papers. I don't think it's unpaid, unrewarded work. It looks unpaid, and it looks like you're doing work that's not really bringing you benefits. But in the end, how else do you learn how to co-edit a journal or an anthology? I've done several anthologies. It's because I practiced doing journals. That just doesn't come to you from nowhere. So those are skills you're learning when you co-edit. You take them over to the other venues, like other journals, and then presses allow you to edit your own books with lots of. I think I've edited over 90 authors in different books and anthologies, but you have to learn the skills from somewhere. So thank you to all of you for always being there.
So please join me in thanking our panelists very much for this good conversation. We are now heading to the library where the reception will occur for the opening of the archives. Wait, don't move yet. I was told that Bonnie Mann would give directions on how, this is what Kamisha told me, on how people should get over there.